It's 1917. Europe is drowning in blood and steel, millions dead, empires collapsing, and across no man's land, a new weapon crawls through the wire. Not cavalry, not artillery, tanks. America watches from across the Atlantic and realizes the brutal truth. The next war won't be won by courage alone. It will be won by the nation that builds better armor, faster engines, and bigger guns. This is the story of every American tank ever made. No myths, no propaganda, just steel, fire, and the machines that changed warfare forever. Number 10. M1000, 917 6-ton tank, the copy that started everything. America entered World War I in April 1917 with exactly 0 combat tanks, not a single prototype, not one factory tooled for armor production, not even a clear doctrine for how tanks should be used. Britain had hundreds rolling through mud in France. France had thousands, including the revolutionary Renault FT that was changing how armies thought about armored warfare. Germany was building their own in response. And the United States had blueprints, good intentions, and an industrial base that had never built anything like a tank before. The solution was pragmatic, effective, and slightly embarrassing. Just copy the French. The Renault FT was the best light tank in the war. Everyone knew it. Small enough to navigate trenches, agile enough to exploit breakthroughs, and revolutionary with its fully rotating turret, a feature that seems obvious now but was groundbreaking in 1918. Every tank before it had fixed guns or limited traverse sponsons. The FT let one man aim and fire in any direction without repositioning the entire vehicle. American military observers in France sent urgent cables. This is what we need. Get the plans. Build them. Now. French designers handed over the blueprints. American factories received the plans and got to work. Assembly lines that had built tractors and automobiles retooled for war. Workers who had never seen armor plate learned to rivet, weld, and assemble fighting vehicles from scratch. The result was the M1000, 917 6-ton tank, a near-perfect copy of the French design, built in factories stretching from Ohio to Massachusetts. It weighed 6 tons, carried a crew of 2, a driver and a gunner crammed into a space barely large enough for both. It mounted either a 37mm gun or a Browning machine gun in that fully rotating turret. For 1918, that was cutting edge, modern, the future of warfare. But America's industrial mobilization came too late. The assembly lines took months to set up. Quality control slowed production. Shipping across the Atlantic 8 more times. By the time the first M1917S rolled off assembly lines in the fall of 1918, the war was already ending. The first American-built tanks arrived in France in late November. Weeks after the armistice silenced the guns, they never fired a shot in anger, never saw combat, never proved themselves against German machine guns or artillery. They were war machines born after the war had died. Still, the M1917 mattered. It taught American industry how to build tanks, how to work armor plate, how to manufacture complex mechanical systems under pressure. It gave the fledgling tank corps something tangible to train with, real steel instead of theories and foreign equipment. And it showed military planners something they needed to see. Armored warfare wasn't a European fantasy. It was the future, and America needed to be part of it. After the war, most M1917S were mothballed or scrapped. Budgets collapsed. The tank corps nearly dissolved, but a few survived in National Guard armories, training a generation of American tankers who would later command Stuarts, Shermans, and Pershings in the next war. The M1917 was obsolete before it deployed, but it was the first, the foundation every American tank after it was built upon. It wasn't a war winner, it was a starting point. Number 9, M2 light tank, the peacetime mistake. Between the wars, America's military budget didn't just shrink, it collapsed. The Great War was over, the economy was in ruins, and Congress had no interest in funding hypothetical future conflicts involving weapons most politicians didn't understand. Tanks were expensive, unproven outside a single war, and the isolationist mood gripping the country meant defense spending was political suicide. So, the Army made do with scraps. Training budgets vanished, procurement froze, and when engineers finally got permission to design new armor, they had to build on a shoestring. The M2 light tank emerged from that era of neglect. Designed in the mid-1930s, it represented everything wrong with peacetime armor development, not what wars needed. What budgets allowed. Too light, too weak, too optimistic about what combat actually looked like. It weighed around 10 tons, barely heavier than some armored cars. It carried a crew of 4 crammed into a hull, never meant for sustained fighting. It mounted a 37mm gun alongside multiple machine guns, which on paper sounded reasonable. Infantry support, reconnaissance, cavalry screening. In reality, it was a death trap waiting for real war to expose it. The armor was thin, not just light, thin, 12 to 25mm at best, riveted together like a pre-war commercial design. Heavy machine gun fire could penetrate it at close range. Armor-piercing rounds went through like tissue, and the riveted construction meant every hit sent metal fragments ricocheting through the crew compartment, killing men even when the shell didn't fully penetrate. The suspension was fragile, designed for roads and training grounds, not the brutal conditions of actual battlefields. The range was limited, the engine underpowered, and that 37mm gun was adequate against other light tanks in controlled tests, but useless against anything heavier or more modern. Then 1939 arrived. Germany invaded Poland. The world watched panzers tear through Polish defenses in weeks. Armor wasn't theoretical anymore. It was the future of warfare, rolling across Europe in combined arms, attacks that made World War I tactics look prehistoric. American commanders watched newsreels of France collapsing in 1940, German armor punching through the Ardennes, British tanks burning at Dunkirk, and they looked at their M2 inventory with growing horror. They had built museum pieces, not combat vehicles. Parade ground trainers meant for an era of warfare that no longer existed. By 1940, the M2 was already obsolete. Production shifted immediately to better designs. The M3 Stuart light tank replaced it, carrying real armor and lessons learned from watching Europe burn. Most M2s never left American soil. A few were used for training, teaching crews the basics of armored warfare on machines that would never see combat. Others were stripped for parts, their components recycled into tanks that might actually survive contact with the enemy. None saw serious combat because everyone knew the truth. Sending men into battle in an M2 wasn't just dangerous, it was murder. The M2 light tank was a lesson written in thin steel and wishful thinking. It proved that peacetime militaries build what they can afford, not what they need. And when the shooting starts, affordability doesn't stop bullets, it just fills cemeteries. Number 8. M3 Lee, Grant, the stopgap giant. By 1941, America had a problem it couldn't engineer away. Europe was burning, France had fallen, Britain stood alone, and American factories were months, maybe years, from producing the tank the Army actually wanted. The M4 Sherman was still in development. Turret designs were being tested. Engines were being swapped. Production lines were being planned. But none of that mattered if German panzers rolled through the Middle East or Soviet armor turned against the Allies. The Army needed a medium tank with a 75mm gun, and they needed it now. The M3 was born from that desperation. Engineers knew exactly what they wanted: a tank with enough firepower to kill German armor at range. But American turret technology couldn't handle the 75mm gun yet. The turret ring wasn't wide enough. The recoil mechanisms weren't ready. The whole system needed another year of development. So they did something bizarre, something that looked insane on paper, but solved the immediate problem. They mounted the big gun in a sponson on the right side of the hull, like a World War I tank, and stuck a smaller 37mm gun in a conventional turret on top. The result looked like 2 tanks welded together by a madman. Tall, awkward, and ungainly. It stood over 10 feet high, making it an easy target for anything with a gun. The hull-mounted 75mm had limited traverse, meaning the entire tank had to turn to aim. The crew compartment was cramped with 6 or 7 men depending on the variant, all packed into a space never designed for that many bodies. British crews called it the Grant after the Union general. Americans called it the Lee after the Confederate one. Everyone called it temporary, a placeholder, a machine that would be obsolete the moment something better arrived. But temporary doesn't mean ineffective. The M3 weighed 30 tons. It had decent armor for early war standards, and that 75mm gun could kill German panzers at ranges the enemy didn't expect. In North Africa in 1942, British Grant tanks shocked Rommel's Afrika Korps during the battles around Gazala and Tobruk. For the first time, Allied armor could stand toe-to-toe with German guns and trade kills instead of dying. The high profile made it an easy target. The limited traverse was a tactical nightmare. But when the 75 fired, it penetrated, and that changed everything. American Marines used M3s in the Pacific at Guadalcanal and Tarawa. Against Japanese armor, the Lee was complete overkill. Japanese tanks were light, thinly armored, and no match for American steel. But against fortifications, bunkers, and entrenched positions, the 75mm gun was perfect for reducing hardened targets. The M3's career was short. By late 1942, Shermans were rolling off assembly lines. The Lee was retired, phased out, and forgotten. But for one critical year, it was the best medium tank America could field, a stopgap that held the line just long enough for something better to arrive. It wasn't elegant, it wasn't the future, but when nothing else existed, it fought, and that was enough. Number 7. M4 Sherman. The tank they said was obsolete. No American tank has been more criticized, more defended, or more misunderstood than the Sherman. For decades, the narrative was simple. It was a death trap. Undergunned, under-armored, and outclassed by German Tigers and Panthers. American soldiers supposedly called it a Ronson lighter because it burned so easily. Forget all of that. Most of it is myth. The M4 Sherman was the most important tank of World War II. Not the best, not the most powerful, but the most important, because wars aren't won by the tank with the thickest armor or the biggest gun. They're won by the nation that can field thousands of reliable machines and keep them running under impossible conditions. The Sherman was designed for exactly that. It weighed 33 tons, carried a crew of 5, and mounted a 75mm gun that could handle most enemy armor it encountered. Early models used a radial aircraft engine. Later versions switched to diesel or Ford 5.8 setups. It had decent armor, good speed, and excellent reliability. More importantly, it was easy to build. American factories produced over 50,000 of them. 50,000. Germany built around 6,000 Panthers. The Sherman didn't need to be better tank for tank. It needed to be everywhere. In combat, the Sherman performed exactly as designed. It wasn't meant to duel Tigers in open fields. It was meant to support infantry, break through defenses, and exploit breakthroughs. When Shermans met heavy German armor, they used numbers, flanking, and coordination. Yes, crews died, but crews die in every war. The Sherman brought more of them home than any other Allied tank. The British used it. The Soviets used it. The Free French used it. After the war, dozens of nations bought surplus Shermans and kept them in service for decades. Israel upgraded them with modern guns and fought in them through the 1970s. The Sherman wasn't a death trap. It was a war winner, a reliable, adaptable, mass-produced machine that proved American industrial power could bury the enemy in steel. It didn't have to be the best tank. It just had to be good enough to win, and it was. Number 6. M26 Pershing. Too late, too heavy, too good. By late 1944, American tank crews knew they had a problem. The Sherman was reliable. It was everywhere. But when it met a Tiger or Panther head-on, it died. The Army had known for years that something heavier was needed, but development was slow, doctrine was cautious, and shipping a heavier tank across the Atlantic posed logistical nightmares. The M26 Pershing finally arrived in Europe in February 1945, just 3 months before Germany surrendered. It was too late to change the war, but it was exactly what American armor needed for the next one. The Pershing weighed 46 tons, mounted a 90mm high-velocity gun, and had frontal armor thick enough to stop most German rounds. It wasn't as heavy as a Tiger. It wasn't as powerful as a Panther, but it was close enough. And unlike German heavy tanks, the Pershing was reliable. American crews loved it. For the first time, they had a tank that could stand and fight instead of maneuvering and flanking. In the handful of engagements before Germany surrendered, Pershings performed well. One famously dueled a Panther in Cologne and won. Footage of that fight became iconic. But the Pershing's real war was Korea. When North Korean T-34-85s crossed the border in 1950, the Pershing was the only American tank that could stop them. It fought through frozen mountains and urban rubble, proving that American heavy armor could handle whatever the Soviets threw at it. After Korea, the Pershing evolved into the Patton series. But its legacy was established. It was the first true American heavy tank. The machine that proved the Sherman era was over, and the age of main battle tanks had begun. It arrived too late for World War II, but it was right on time for the Cold War. Number 5. M46, M47, M48, Patton series, the Cold War workhorse. When the shooting stopped in 1945, the enemy changed. No more Wehrmacht, no more Axis. Now it was the Red Army, and Soviet armor was everywhere. Stalin wasn't demobilized, he was fortifying. Thousands of 34s lined up along the Iron Curtain. Behind them, factories churned out heavier tanks, bigger guns, and armor designed to roll through Western Europe in weeks. American planners knew the Pershing was good, but it wasn't enough. They needed something better, something that could evolve as fast as the threat. The Patton series was America's answer. Not one tank, a family, a bloodline of medium tanks designed to adapt, upgrade, and hold the line against Soviet steel for as long as necessary. The M46 Patton arrived first. It was essentially an upgraded Pershing. Same hull, same silhouette, but with a better engine, improved transmission, and a new designation to mark the psychological shift from World War II designs to Cold War armor. It was faster, more reliable, and ready when North Korea invaded the South in 1950. American M46s deployed to Korea and faced 3485s in brutal mountain warfare. They proved American tanks could match anything the communist bloc fielded. The fights were close, often decided by crew, skill, and terrain, but the Patton held its ground. It won more than it lost, and that was enough. The M47 Patton came next in the early 1950s. It combined the M46 chassis with a new elliptical turret and improved fire control systems. It looked more modern. The ballistic shaping was better, but it was rushed into production to meet NATO demands, and the speed showed. Reliability issues plagued early models. The fire control was temperamental. It was quickly replaced by something better. But the M47 still mattered. It kept NATO armored divisions equipped with standardized American hardware, while engineers perfected the design. It armed allies who couldn't wait for the next generation. It bought time. The M48 Patton was that next generation, the perfected version. Entering service in 1953, it became the backbone of American and Allied armor for 2 decades. It mounted a 90mm gun, weighed 49 tons, and had a distinctive rounded turret that became instantly recognizable on battlefields from Germany to Vietnam. The M48 was everything the M47 should have been. Reliable, tough, easy to maintain under field conditions. American troops used it in Vietnam, where it provided mobile firepower against an enemy with no real armor threat. Israeli crews took it into the Six-Day War and the Yom Kippur War, fighting Syrian and Egyptian tanks in deserts where visibility stretched for miles. Jordanian, Pakistani, and West German forces all fielded M48 variants, each modified slightly for their doctrine. It was adaptable. When gun technology improved, the M48 got better guns. When night vision became viable, thermal sights were added. When reactive armor was developed, it bolted on. The basic platform kept accepting upgrades long after newer designs replaced it in American service. The Patton series wasn't revolutionary. It wasn't the most advanced tank of its era, but it was exactly what the Cold War needed. A solid, dependable platform that could be built in numbers, shipped to allies, and trusted in combat no matter where or when. It held the line for 2 decades. And when the threat evolved, so did the Patton. That was the point. That was always the point. Number 4. M60, the last gunfighter. By the late 1950s, American armor doctrine faced a problem it couldn't ignore. The M48 Patton had served well through Korea and into the Cold War. But across the Iron Curtain, Soviet engineers were building bigger, meaner, and better protected tanks. The T-54, the T-55, and soon the T-62, all carried guns powerful enough to crack open a Patton at ranges where the American 90mm couldn't reply. The Army needed more firepower. They needed it fast, and they needed it without designing an entirely new tank from scratch. The M60 was born from that pressure, the last American tank to carry a rifled main gun, the bridge between the Patton era and the Abrams Revolution that was still 20 years away. Entering service in 1960, the M60 looked like evolution, not revolution. Its hull and chassis borrowed heavily from the M48. The silhouette was familiar, the engine layout similar, but the turret was new, and mounted inside was a British-designed 105mm gun that changed everything. That gun was powerful, accurate, and could penetrate any Soviet tank at combat ranges. It fired armor-piercing, fin-stabilized discarding sabot rounds that turned enemy steel into scrap. The tank weighed 52 tons, carried improved armor over the Patton, and used a more powerful diesel engine that gave it decent speed and excellent range. It looked like a Patton. It moved like a Patton, but when it fired, it hit harder than anything America had fielded before. The M60 went to war almost immediately. Not American wars at first, but Allied ones. Israel bought hundreds and threw them into the brutal tank battles of the Yom Kippur War in 1973. In the Sinai Desert and the Golan Heights, M60s faced Syrian T-62s and Egyptian armor in some of the largest tank engagements since World War II. They performed well, trading kills in desperate fights where crew skill mattered as much as the machine. American M60s saw combat in Lebanon during the 1980s. Marines landed them in Beirut, using their firepower to support peacekeeping operations that turned violent. And in 1991, older M60s fought in the Gulf War alongside the newer Abrams, proving the old rifled gun could still kill when aimed right. Through the 70s and 80s, the M60 evolved constantly. Better fire control systems replaced manual range finding. Reactive armor blocks bolted onto the hull to defeat shaped charges. Laser rangefinders gave crews first-shot accuracy at extended ranges. Thermal sights let them fight at night. By the time the Abrams began replacing it in frontline American service, the M60 was a thoroughly modern tank wrapped in a 1960 design, and it didn't disappear. Thousands are still in service today. Turkey operates upgraded M60s with modern electronics and active protection systems. Egypt fields hundreds. Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and other allied nations continue running them because the basic design remains sound. A powerful gun, thick armor, and a reliable engine will always matter on a battlefield. The M60 was the end of an era, the last American tank designed before computers, composite armor, and gas turbines changed warfare forever. It wasn't flashy, it wasn't revolutionary, but for 3 decades, it was the tank that kept America's armored force credible, deployable, and lethal, while the future was being built in secret proving grounds. It bridged 2 generations of armor, and even now, decades after retirement, it refuses to die. Number 3. M551 Sheridan, the aluminum gamble. In the 1960s, the Army wanted something new, a light tank that could swim, fly in cargo planes, and kill Soviet armor. The answer was the M551 Sheridan, and it was one of the strangest tanks America ever built. The Sheridan weighed just 15 tons. Its hull was aluminum, which made it light enough for airdrops, but vulnerable to heavy weapons. It mounted a 152mm gun launcher that could fire both conventional rounds and guided missiles. On paper, it was brilliant. In reality, it was a maintenance nightmare. The gun launcher system was temperamental. The combustible casings often failed. The missile guidance was unreliable, and the aluminum armor meant that RPGs and heavy machine guns could penetrate it. Crews called it a death trap. But in Vietnam, the Sheridan found a purpose. Its low weight let it cross weak bridges. Its firepower demolished bunkers. And in the close jungle fighting, its vulnerabilities mattered less. American cavalry units used it for reconnaissance and fire support, and it performed well enough to earn grudging respect. The Sheridan served until the 1990s. The 82nd Airborne kept them because they were the only air-droppable armor available. A handful even deployed to Panama in the First Gulf War, more as symbols than serious combat vehicles. The M551 Sheridan was a gamble that didn't pay off. Too complex, too fragile, too ambitious for the technology of its time. But it represented something important: American willingness to experiment, to take risks, and to learn from failure. Number 2. M1 Abrams, the turbine monster. In 1980, the United States unveiled a tank unlike anything the world had seen, the M1 Abrams. It didn't have the biggest gun, it didn't have the thickest armor, but it changed everything. The Abrams was built around a gas turbine engine, the same kind that powers jet aircraft. It gave the tank a power-to-weight ratio no diesel could match, 70 tons moving at 45 miles per hour, acceleration like a sports car, and a sound that became legendary, a high-pitched whine instead of a diesel roar. Its armor was revolutionary. Chobham composite, later upgraded with depleted uranium layers, thick enough to shrug off Soviet tank rounds, light enough to keep the tank mobile, and classified enough that even today, the exact composition remains secret. The M1 originally mounted a 105mm gun, but the M1A1 upgrade in 1985 added the German-designed 120mm smoothbore, the most powerful tank gun in the American arsenal, firing depleted uranium penetrators that could punch through any armor on Earth. The Abrams proved itself in the Gulf War. In 1991, American armor faced the Iraqi Republican Guard, equipped with Soviet T-72s. The battles were massacres. Abrams tanks killed enemy armor at ranges where return fire couldn't even reach them. Thermal sights let them fight at night. Superior fire control meant first-round kills. And their armor meant they were nearly invulnerable. One Abrams survived over 20 direct hits from T-72 rounds without a single penetration. Another was hit by a friendly fire DU round and kept fighting. The tank's survivability became legendary. Since then, the Abrams has fought in Iraq, Afghanistan, and dozens of smaller conflicts. It's been upgraded continuously. Better electronics, improved armor, trophy active protection systems. The M1 A2 V3 in service today is almost unrecognizable from the original 1980 model. The Abrams didn't just win battles, it redefined what a main battle tank could be: fast, protected, and lethal, at ranges that turned engagements into target practice. For over 40 years, it's been the standard every other nation measures their armor against. It's still the king, and nothing on the battlefield can challenge it. Number 1. The tank that defined American armor philosophy. Every tank on this list tells a story, but together, they reveal something deeper: a philosophy, a way of thinking about armored warfare that separates American tanks from everyone else. American armor was never about building the biggest gun or the thickest armor. It was about building what could win. The M1917 copied the French because copying worked. The M3 Lee was ugly but available. The Sherman was good enough to be everywhere. The Patton series evolved with the threat, and the Abrams combined speed, protection, and firepower in ways no one had before. The Soviet philosophy was mass and simplicity. Build tens of thousands of 34s and overwhelm the enemy. The German philosophy was engineering perfection. Build Tigers and Panthers so good that numbers didn't matter. Both approaches failed. The Soviets lost 20 million people. The Germans lost the war. America's approach was different. Build what works. Build it in numbers. And keep improving it until the war is over. The Sherman wasn't perfect, but 50,000 of them ended the Reich. The Abrams isn't invincible, but in 40 years of combat, enemy tanks have never destroyed one in a fair fight. The story of American tanks is the story of pragmatism over perfection, industrial power over individual brilliance, reliability over innovation for its own sake, and a willingness to learn, adapt, and evolve faster than the enemy could respond. From the M1917 to the M1A2, every American tank carried the same unspoken mission: get the crew home alive, support the infantry, win the battle, and do it again tomorrow. Not with elegance, not with glory, just with steel, fire, and the stubborn refusal to build a tank that couldn't do its job. That's the legacy. That's what every American tank ever made was designed to do. And that's why, 80 years after the Sherman rolled off the assembly line, American armor still rules the battlefield. Steel legacy. From the copied Renault of World War I to the composite monsters of the 21st century, American tanks have carried men through every major conflict for over 100 years. Some were rushed, some were brilliant, some were compromises built because nothing better existed, but each one represented the same truth. Wars are won by nations that can turn industrial power into battlefield superiority faster than the enemy can respond. The American tank story isn't about individual machines. It's about a system: factories, supply chains, training programs, and soldiers who learned to trust the metal around them even when it wasn't perfect. If you've made it this far, you already know this isn't just history. It's the foundation of how modern wars are fought. And if you want more deep dives into the weapons, machines, and moments that shaped our world, subscribe, because the next chapter is already being written, and you won't want to miss it.